Welcome back to the 2 Point Podcast. Today we're with Dan Turchin of People Rain, and you can read all about it in the show notes, of course. Dan and I have conversed before. I've been on his podcast as well, and we know each other going back a little ways, so it's always nice to have Dan on. Welcome to the show.
Roy, it is an understatement to say it's my pleasure to be here when I get to hang out with my buddy and exchange witty banter. There's no bigger highlight in my day. So good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It would be an interesting thing to have some relative named Witty Banter. That would be a good name. So it's not often that you find a good quote on somebody's LinkedIn profile, but you have one on your LinkedIn profile. It says, every once in a while, magic bites disrupt, BYTES for those of you who aren't reading along, transform and inspire. I want a front row seat when they do. So tell me about that, because I think that's certainly a dew point. It's a point at which you jump into something enthusiastically. So tell me more.
I love this concept of a dew point. It's so much about the essence of humanity is finding that dew point. And like when I coach young entrepreneurs, maybe first-time entrepreneurs, and they say, should I start the company or should I not start the company? And I say, the time to start the company is when you can't not start the company. The itch you can't not scratch. And similarly, I've been thinking a lot about this since you teed it up, my dew point. And for me, I think back long time ago before Roy and Dan met I think it was through Ron Munns at HDI. Probably back in the 90s, but my first job out of school was as an industrial engineer at the Walt Disney Company. And I loved my job so much. I would give anything to be a better employee, take care of customers better. It's where I learned the value of customer service. I was passionate about designing guest experiences, but I was shackled to this pager. This was in the days before cell phones. And I developed very quickly this adversarial relationship with my pager because it represented only the things that were impeding me from work and none of the things that were empowering me at work. And so I came to realize that whenever it was buzzing, which was frequently, it was almost always an interruption that meant, I wasn't fully present. I wasn't doing the job that I was paid to do. And my dew point, looking back now 3+ decades, was realizing that relationship that I had with my work, with the very essence of who I am as a human, was intricately connected to my relationship with machines and technology. And if somehow there was a vision of the world in which humans are doing their best work, they are their best selves, it occurred to me that it would probably involve a symbiotic relationship between humans and machines. And so I celebrate the power of bites to transform and disrupt. And throughout my career, it's now, going on about 30 years of really trying to inspire work and inspire people and rethink what it means to be a human when your collaborator might be a bot or you might have a dependency on a machine. And I think this complicated relationship that humans have always had, going back to even before the first industrial revolution, but 18th century England, is something that continues to shape our society and our humanity. And that was kind of the origin. That was my origin story and my dew point.
I think it's a great origin story. And you mentioned something there about how our work and our lives are intertwined, and also the interrelations between the world of machines and now AI, of course, and us. And I wrote a little while ago about there being two kinds of hybrid work when the big deal came out after post-pandemic, when everybody was working remotely, and then we're going to have hybrid work, some in the office, some at home, whatever. And I thought, well, there's really two kinds of that. One is the travel back and forth, and the other is the interface between humans and machines. So you've got a hybrid team working for you, and that, of course, that's what you guys are kind of all about, right? And I love some of the things that you say as an organization, as a company. We're motivated by our customers and committed. Those are great words. Motivated and committed to creating a new world of work where employees are empowered to focus on critical thinking, empathy, coaching, and intuition, innately human skills while AI automates mundane tasks. And I think about some of the things that are going on now in terms of how AI is being introduced into organizations. And are you seeing it happen the way that you envision it? Or do you think that there are a lot of organizations that are kind of missing the boat and putting too much weight on the power of AI and not focusing more on the people side?
Yeah, so our founding vision at People Rain is to extract all the friction out of work, because I believe that when you take the friction out of work, what remains is the work that people love to do. And that while used incorrectly, machines can be dehumanizing. When they're used correctly, they can augment us and make us our best selves. And so if you were to kind of build the world's biggest digital brain that understood where the friction is at work and can partner with you to identify and extract it or remove it, then I believe that, call it 4 to 6 hours a week of productive time that you get back, is what makes you do the best work of your life. And so the thing that I think is going right is that we're having a global dialogue about what is a machine and what is a human and what's the desired interface between the two. And as long as we're always distinguishing the machine from the human and thinking about augmenting the human with the machine, then we're on the right track. What concerns me, and I discuss this frequently on the podcast, you were a great guest, Roy, AI and the future of work. What we frequently discuss is when that relationship or that bond is abused or misunderstood, we run the risk of creating an adversarial relationship with machines. Only this time around, this is not like Luddism in the 18th century. The machines increasingly seem like humans. And so we have an added burden, certainly as technologists, as employers, to make it clear that what makes us human is not a skill that can ever be attributed to a bot. And so we should never pretend that the bot is a human. We should never anthropomorphize the bot. We should be very clear that everything that AI knows, it knows because it learned from a human. And we control the on-off switch, and we have the power to say when and how our work product can be contributed to or augmented by AI. And I want to keep having that conversation where we empower the human to establish those guardrails with the machine. I think it's incumbent on us to do that and have that dialogue so that we prevent a lot of the really unhelpful conversations that can lead to dark places about the bot apocalypse and various things like that. So I think these are decisions that we consciously make as leaders. And, to me, that's the most important conversation of our time.
And I find it somewhat fascinating that there have always been a bunch of, let's call it a plethora because I'm feeling academic today. Let's call it a plethora of tasks that have a tendency to wind up on the bottom of the to-do pile. And those are the things, and some of them are important, but they're not urgent, right? And so they have a feeling they keep getting dropped to the bottom. Like cleaning up the knowledge base if you're in the world of customer service or support, and tasks like that that are ongoing. They don't have a tremendous amount of urgency behind them. And getting back that X amount of hours a day or X amount of hours a week, I think is a really interesting way to look at it because now we've got the time to address those tasks, as you say, the mundane tasks that we really don't like to do. And AI can perhaps give us ways to free up our time to be able to do what we need to do. They can also assist in those tasks like knowledge base cleanup and so forth. They're great at summarizing and so forth and so on. So, but I think that augmentation is such a key view here. And I know of one organization that decided they were going to augment their staff with AI to offer customer support. And this was a customer, it was a contact center, an IT support desk. And what they were able to do was they were only offering support 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, business hours only. That was it. With the AI augmentation, they were capable of going 24/7 without hiring additional staff. Now, to say that is good. They didn't lay anybody off. They didn't replace people. They augmented people, and I think that's a really key concept. And you and I have talked about that before. So the net effects are where your company's values lie, and those values are about making customers successful. They're about doing great things every day. I love these. About doing the right thing when nobody's watching, which means I don't dance. It's the opposite. Dancing like nobody's watching. I don't dance. No, I don't care who's watching. Um, and I have to ask this question, and it makes me a little uncomfortable to ask it. But one of the key values that you state on your website is embracing diversity. That seems to be in today's geopolitical climate, to put it carefully, a little bit of a dangerous area for reasons I don't understand, but there we go. Diversity is a loaded word. And can you talk me through a little bit about what you mean by that and what it means in terms of the basic thrust of the organization? How do you embrace diversity when you think about the machine human interface and what your tools do?
I'll tell you why that's a core value at PeopleRain, but I'll tell you why it's particularly relevant in a world where AI is infiltrating all of our workflows. On the core value side, we embrace diversity of thought and diversity of backgrounds, and we celebrate the coming together of ideas that represent the whole spectrum of ways that humans think and process and form ideas and challenge each other. That's what diversity means. Obviously, there's a lot of kind of manipulation of that word. It's become kind of a lightning rod for a lot of different conflicting philosophies. But at PeopleRain, it means to us that we celebrate the bringing together of ideas that represent diverse cultures and attitudes and ways of thinking. Now, that has a particular relevance in this field that we're in. And the reason is because AI is perfectly designed to replicate human bias. So in order to exercise AI responsibly, we as practitioners, we as leaders must be held accountable to being able to understand the chain of custody, where the data has been, where it came from, how it was cleaned. We want to make sure if we're doing things like using AI to make HR related decisions, who gets hired, potentially who gets fired, who gets a raise, who gets a loan, etc. It's very important that we interrogate or introspect the data to make sure that we understand and we can vouch for where it came from before we're relying on it to make decisions. And so that the term diversity can also apply to what is kind of more of a technical term, but data hygiene. We want to make sure that that the ways that we expect the AI, the models to behave is well represented by the data that we're using to train the models. So I think that's That's an important point to make on this as part of this conversation that actually transcends embrace diversity as a core philosophy or a core value of people.
And just from a practical standpoint, as we know, AI absorbs from the outside. It's like Johnny Five, the little robot saying input, input, right? It's just absorbing information from whatever sources we give it. And if we only give it one side of that, one part of that, we're also going to run out of material pretty quickly. And there's some concern in the world of AI that we're going to run out of training material anyway. And there's synthetic training, and there's lots of other ways to approach it. But I think, from my standpoint, that's a concern as well. That we need to make sure that there's as much breadth and depth to the materials that we're giving to the AI to train. And I think that's part of what you were saying. So we talk about guardrails and so forth, and one of the things that I've thought about, and I've had a couple of conversations with some academic folks about it, is having a framework for AI safety, as it were. That kind of my first thought was, hey, I know somebody who is the chief nuclear safety person at a major university. And I said to him, how would you think about this from your perspective as a nuclear safety guy? How do you approach AI and make sure that it isn't going to do the kind of damage that bad radiation would, given the opportunity? And he said, radiation is kind of governed by physics. What you're talking about with AI is probably a little bit closer to biology, because it's dynamic and it's a little bit unpredictable and it evolves over time. And so he connected me with the person who does biosafety at the same university, and I had a good conversation with him. It's something that I'm thinking about pretty hard. When you think about having some kind of guardrails in an organization to make sure that we're not just sending AI off into the hinterland without some kind of guidance, what are the kinds of things, aside from what we've already talked about with diversity and so forth, what else are you looking at?
So there's the answer about what the technology is capable of, and then there's the answer about culturally what we allow it to do. And the guardrails is more the latter than the former. So I'll talk about
Mm-hmm.
what I recommend every people oriented customer, every organization I have an opportunity to speak to. I recommend that culturally they adopt a few basic principles, and I refer to it as taking the pledge. And it turns out more than any technical guardrails that any vendor can instrument into a product, this one simple pledge or cultural process has more impact than anything else. It's when you ask every employee in the company to take this pledge. I openly and enthusiastically will share how and when my work product was enhanced or augmented by AI. Simple statement, it has profound implications. It sends the message that we as a culture embrace experimentation and innovation. And it tells every employee that we as leaders, for the first time, we're not traffic cops. We don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers. But together, we're going to come together and engage and ask questions and tell each other what worked and what didn't work. And what I recommend is every month you put one team member or team in front of the organization to tell a story about how their work product was augmented or enhanced by AI. And what you do is you take AI out of the shadows. Because if you don't have that conversation, what happens is every employee is wondering whether or not they're going to get penalized, maybe rewarded. Should I celebrate my usage of AI? Or maybe I need to hide it and pretend that I get credit for the thing that AI assisted me in doing. Well, take it out of the shadows, right? Inspire everyone to do their best work and acknowledge when it was enhanced or augmented by AI. So in terms of, how I think about guardrails, the role of leaders the role of organizations is to implement guardrails such that employees are encouraged to experiment. So the role of the employer is to say, it will not help you do something dangerous or break the law or maybe engage in a conversation about your suicidal thoughts. That's not why we're bringing AI into the workplace. So we owe you a safe place where you can experiment. And what you owe us is be open and honest and enthusiastic. And together we'll kind of define this future of work, and we'll be the ones that are going to get, more benefits, more, we'll be more profitable. You'll love work more. That's a culture that we want, but it starts with leaders being very intentional. And I found that just taking the pledge is actually the best way to create a culture that incorporates the appropriate AI guardrails.
And also, by approaching employees with that pledge, it lets them know that it's safe to use the AI, that you're encouraging them to use the AI as long as they're acknowledging it. And I think that's a very interesting component of that side of the culture. Um, so, how do you think about companies that are putting a lot of money and time and effort into getting AI to pass a Turing test and then maybe putting out a bot that identifies itself as a person and doesn't identify itself as AI and doesn't give you any clues that it's AI until you've kind of maybe suss out that it is? Is that fair? Is it unfair? Just give me your thoughts
Yeah,
on that,
yeah,
Dan.
strong opinions on that, as you might imagine. Alan Turing, brilliant mathematician, did the world a disservice by by giving us the Turing test. Can we create machines that I'll say for emphasis that confuse humans into thinking that they're interacting with humans and not machines? That should not be anyone's design goal. I had a gentleman named Peter Voss, brilliant scientist, on my podcast. He's one of the co-inventors of the term AGI, artificial general intelligence. And we had a spirited discussion about the Turing test and about why any human would think it's a indication of progress to develop technology that fools humans into thinking that they're dealing with another human. When Google years ago introduced a technology that could book a hair appointment for you, it chose to do so in a way that sounded so lifelike that they planted a victory flag because humans couldn't tell that it was a bot making a hair appointment. Well, let's unpack that a little bit and discuss how that actually did a disservice to humanity. If the job that I want done is to have a hair appointment made, that can be done in a way that is responsible. And in no way does that require me to be confused or convinced because of the bot's pattern of intonation or ums and ahs or pauses. That does not complement the job that I want the bot to do. And so I think there's always a way to unpack the job that we want AI to do from the how that job is being done. And it should never involve anthropomorphizing the bot in a way that confuses a human.
And I do. First of all, let me just say that a hair appointment is not something I would ever want done. That just saying. But on the other hand, I have a couple of AI tools that I like using. They're extremely useful to me, and one of them has a tendency to anthropomorphize itself, and that kind of annoys me. And it's an extremely useful tool, but I wish it wouldn't call itself I. You know, I really do. And I think that my personal opinion is that we do need to differentiate when we're dealing with things like somebody who needs help. Let them know that they are dealing with AI. They're dealing with automation. It may be extremely useful, and if it works great for them, so much the better. They're going to come back. They're going to like it. They're going to tell you that they like it, and they're going to come back for it. But so that's just my approach. Is by all means introduce yourself as being AI and let people know. So, any other closing thoughts from you in terms of how you're approaching this, because this is still very new. It's uncharted territory a lot of times, and we know how easy it is to become confused and wander off when you think you're looking at one thing on the trail map and it turns out you're following the wrong path. What are some of the warning signs for you, or what are some of the guideposts that you look for as you think about this?
Roy, as you know, I'm firmly on Team Human, and uh, I champion innovation, and I think it's never been a more exciting time to be alive as a human. I think there are risks, and I think we need to be very aware of what they are and exercise AI responsibly. But in terms of where we've been and where we're headed, that continues to make me an AI optimist. We went from, in the span of literally 3-4 years. I mean, just a speck, in the sequence of time. We went from, I call it, we're now entering the third generation of AI. Not to mention, since the 50s, a
Right.
group of computer scientists at Dartmouth, led by Marvin Minsky, kind of coined the term. But in the current kind of AI summer that we're in, we went through generative AI, our introduction to large language models. We're now in the process of kind of 2.0 agentic AI, where we give AI some agency to do a thing as opposed to talk about a thing. But we're right on the cusp of what I'll call AI 3.0, and that's where AI is spatially aware. So moving from generative to agentic to spatial. And I believe that when it comes to the real role, the real reason I celebrate AI, I think that when AI has spatial awareness, when it can do more than the equivalent of like a 1980s MS DOS prompt. It's kind of the interface today, but when AI can experience the world and understand things like, where's the, what does a rose smell like? And, what does a hug feel like? And, when you start to think about how humans experience the world, some of those, we talk about data and potentially running out of it, we'll never run out of spatial data. And that's what's really going to, unlock the ability for us to have a really symbiotic relationship with AI. And the use cases that I refer back to when I think about how we'll know when we're truly making progress are when, every amputee can have a smart limb, that, is every bit as real to them because it gives them, full motion back. When we're able to, introduce patterns in crop yields that might reduce incidence of famine because we're able to grow, heat resistant certain, breeds of crop because we're using AI to discover new compounds and things like that. Global warming, I think, the chemistry of the atmosphere, I think there's data out there that has not been tapped that can help us, limit the effects of global warming, support a growing population, potentially extend our health span. I think we're soon going to be on the cusp of being able to have those conversations. And I think AI is going to seem less scary. Perhaps for a time it will seem scary because those are very much the kind of the stuff of science fiction. But when we start to see how it's improving lives, and we do it in a way that's responsible, I think that's when the dialogue, is going to shift rapidly. We will no longer be talking about, can it write a haiku about my cat? It can't. It can't, and it can do a pretty credible job of that. But when instead we're talking about life changing kinds of chemistries and solutions to big problems, I think that that's what a lot of the AI energy is currently being invested in. And I'd say everyone who's an AI cynic, hold out hope, because there are a lot of amazing entrepreneurs and people who care deeply about making the world better, who are making good use of these amazing emergent properties of AI. So that's kind of what keeps me enthusiastic about where we're headed, despite some of the potential dangers.
And I think both of us know that that enthusiasm is what gets us through our lovely days of complexity. So Dan, thank you very much for having this conversation. As always, it's good to talk with you. And thanks for being on the podcast, sir.
Roy, the pleasure's all mine. You gave me an opportunity to think about my dew point, and for that, I thank you.